Picture what happens at a prescription renewal appointment. You sit down, your doctor pulls up your chart, they ask how you have been feeling. You mention your legs or your feet or the fatigue that has been building since last year. They listen, they nod, they type a few notes. Then they renew your prescription. And that is the end of it. No blood test. No nutrient panel. No question about whether the medication you have been taking for 4 or 6 or 8 years may be slowly depleting something your nervous system depends on. Research published in 2026 found that while 87% of clinicians were aware of the link between long-term metformin use and B12 deficiency, only 39% reported actually testing for it annually. Knowing and doing are two different things. And the gap between them, that gap, is living in the tingling in your feet. I am Dr. Mary, and today I am going to show you why B12 is the most under-monitored nutrient in senior care, what depletes it, how it shows up in your legs, and exactly what to say the next time someone hands you a renewed prescription without checking. There is a cause of B12 deficiency that affects every person over 60, and it has nothing to do with any medication. B12 deficiency is estimated to affect between 10 and 15% of people over the age of 60 in the general population, independently of what they take. Because after 60, something happens in the stomach that almost nobody explains. Stomach acid production declines with age, and B12 from food from meat, eggs, dairy requires stomach acid to be released from its protein carrier before the body can absorb it. Without sufficient acid, the B12 stays bound to the food protein. It passes through. It never reaches your bloodstream. This condition is called food cobalamin malabsorption. It affects a significant percentage of older adults and produces no obvious symptoms until the depletion is far enough along to reach your nerves. Now, add metformin, or a heartburn medication, or both. Each of those adds a separate layer of depletion on top of the age-related decline that was already in progress, and each prescription renewal that passes without a B12 test is another year of depletion without intervention. Stay with me, because what I found in the research about how often this test actually gets ordered is the number that has stayed with me most across this entire series. I want to tell you about a man I will call Thomas. Thomas was 73. He had been on metformin for 6 years and on a proton pump inhibitor for 4. Both medications were prescribed by good doctors for genuine reasons: type 2 diabetes and chronic acid reflux. Both were working as intended. Both were renewed at every appointment, without fail, for years. Nobody tested his B12. Not once in 6 years on metformin. Not once in 4 years on a PPI. Thomas's symptoms had started so gradually that he had difficulty pinning down when exactly they began. The tingling in his feet he had mentioned at one appointment and been told was likely diabetic neuropathy. The fatigue that arrived by 2 in the afternoon he assumed was age. The difficulty remembering whether he had taken his pills that morning, he wrote that off too. What Thomas did not know, and what nobody told him, was that he was running 2 separate B12 depletion pathways simultaneously. The metformin was blocking the calcium-dependent absorption step in his terminal ileum. The PPI was impairing the acid environment his stomach needed to release B12 from his food proteins. And his age-related decline in stomach acid was the third layer underneath both of them. 3 pathways. 6 years. No test. When his B12 was finally measured after his daughter, who had been watching this channel, asked his doctor specifically, it came back at 167 picograms per milliliter, below the lower limit of the standard laboratory reference range, below the 200 marker, well below the 300 threshold where neurological symptoms typically begin. Thomas was not unusual. He was the rule. And what happened to him next is why I want you to stay for the next 4 minutes. Here is the biological reason B12 deficiency can go undetected for years. even as it is actively damaging your nerves. Your liver is a B12 warehouse. Under normal conditions, it holds enough stored B12 to last 2 to 5 years, sometimes longer. When your dietary and medication-related intake of B12 starts to decline, your liver does not signal the problem. It quietly draws down on its reserves. Your blood level stays stable. Your blood test looks normal. Your doctor sees nothing to act on. Think of it like a car with a hidden fuel reserve you did not know existed. The gauge shows full. The car runs fine. But the main tank is empty and has been for months. The car is running on the reserve. And one day, without warning, with no gradual sign of trouble, the reserve runs out too. In B12 terms, that is the moment neurological symptoms begin. Not gradually introduced over weeks, often arriving or accelerating over months once the liver stores finally fall below the level needed to protect the peripheral nerves. By the time tingling and burning appear in your feet, B12 depletion has typically been in progress for years. The symptom is late. The test, if it had been run annually as guidelines recommend, would have shown the decline long before the nerves were involved. A 2006 review in Postgraduate Medical Journal established that B12 deficiency affects 10 to 15% of people over 60 in the general population, independent of any medication, specifically because of this age-related decline in stomach acid and its effect on B12 absorption from food. And here's the detail that makes this especially important for people over 60 who are not on any medication. Food cobalamin malabsorption means that the instinctive solution, eating more B12-rich foods, does not actually solve the problem. If your stomach cannot release the B12 from the food protein, eating more steak does not help. The B12 stays bound. It passes through. The form of B12 your body can absorb without stomach acid is crystalline B12, the form found in supplements and fortified foods, because it does not require acid for release. This is why the B12 conversation after 60 is not simply about diet. It is about absorption. And absorption is what changes with age, with medication, and with the intersection of both. Now the testing data, and this is the number that has stayed with me most. A study examining B12 screening patterns found that only 21.9% of symptomatic patients had been evaluated for B12 deficiency in the previous 12 months. In a Veterans Affairs study of 3,687 adults on long-term metformin, only 37% ever received a serum B12 check, despite well-established clinical guidelines recommending it. The ADA 2026 standards of care are direct on this. For patients taking metformin long-term, meaning more than 4 years, vitamin B12 levels should be monitored annually, not periodically, not when symptoms appear. Annually, and research published in 2026 confirmed what those numbers suggest, clinician awareness of the metformin B12 link is high at 87%. But only 39% report actually testing for it at the recommended frequency. Knowledge exists. Implementation does not. The clinical reality is that prescription renewals happen. Annual appointments happen. And B12 tests for many long-term metformin users and older adults generally do not happen at anything close to the recommended frequency. Thomas's daughter changed that by asking one direct question at one appointment. That question, has his B12 been tested? And when was the last time unlocked a 6-year gap in monitoring in under 30 seconds? Now let me tell you what happened to Thomas. And then let me give you exactly what to say. I want to say something directly before we get to the words. You are not going to your doctor to challenge them. You are going to give them information they need to help you more completely. The questions I am about to give you are not confrontational. They are the questions that the guidelines say should already be happening, and that, in most cases, are not. Bringing them is not a challenge. It is a contribution. Thomas began methylcobalamin supplementation at 1,000 micrograms daily. with his doctor's approval. Given that both metformin and PI-related malabsorption impair the standard intestinal absorption pathway, his doctor also initiated monthly B12 injections for the first 3 months to restore his stores more rapidly, bypassing the intestinal absorption problem entirely. Over 4 months, his B12 rose from 167 into a healthy range. The tingling in his feet reduced meaningfully. The afternoon fatigue improved. The word-finding difficulty his family had noticed, which nobody had connected to B12 because nobody had looked improved as well. His doctor documented the neurological improvements and reduced the injection frequency to quarterly for maintenance. Thomas did not stop either of his medications. He continued his metformin and his PPE. What changed was the monitoring and the supplementation protocol that the monitoring made possible. Here is what to say at your next appointment or at the next prescription renewal, which may be the moment that matters most. Say, I want to ask specifically about my B12. I have been on metformin for however many years, and I understand the ADA recommends annual B12 monitoring for long-term metformin users. When was my last test, and what was the number? Notice that you are asking for the number, not just the status. The standard laboratory range for B12 starts at 200 picograms per milliliter, but neurological symptoms can begin below 300. You can be told you are normal and still be in a range where your nerve function is at risk. The number is what tells you where you actually stand. If you are not on metformin but you are over 60, the question is slightly different. Say, I understand that B12 absorption changes with age, particularly after 60. Has my B12 been tested recently? And if you take a PI as well, add, given that I also take a PI, has that been factored into my B12 monitoring? If supplementation is recommended, ask specifically about methylcobalamin rather than cyanocobalamin, particularly if you have nerve symptoms. Methylcobalamin is the neurologically active form and does not require the conversion step that may be less efficient in older adults with absorption difficulties. And if your deficiency is significant as Thomas's, was ask whether an intramuscular injection protocol might restore your stores more quickly than oral supplementation alone, while your daily oral dose is being established. Tomorrow morning, before any other thought, write down 3 things: how long you have been on metformin or a PI, when your last B12 test was or that you do not know, and the question you are going to ask at your next appointment. 3 items written down. Brought to the appointment. That is what changed everything for Thomas. 3 things to carry with you. 1. B12 deficiency affects 10 to 15% of people over 60 in the general population, independent of any medication. After 60, stomach acid declines and B12 from food becomes harder to release and absorb. Metformin and PPIs each add additional depletion layers on top of this age-related baseline. Each prescription renewal that passes without a B12 test is another year of unmonitored decline. 2. B12 deficiency hides for years behind liver stores that keep blood levels artificially stable. By the time tingling and burning appear in your feet, the depletion has typically been in progress for 2 to 5 years. The symptom is late. The test, run annually, would have found the decline earlier before the nerves were involved. 3. The ADA 2026 Standards of Care call for annual B12 monitoring in patients on metformin for more than 4 years. Fewer than 40% of eligible patients are being tested at that frequency. The gap between guideline and practice is being lived in the legs and feet of millions of seniors. Asking the question at your next appointment is how you close that gap for yourself. Before I let you go, something that has been sitting at the edge of this entire series. We have now covered 7 videos, and in each one the theme has been the same. Something is being depleted, the depletion is documented, and the monitoring that would catch it early is not consistently happening. B12, magnesium, CoQ10, all of them separate. all of them affecting different systems in your legs and nerves. But what I have been building toward, what I promised in the last few videos, is the convergence point, the one compound that sits underneath all of these systems. The molecule that CoQ10 needs to function. That magnesium requires to be properly utilized inside your cells. That B12 depends on for its neurological role. It is not a supplement you would find easily. It is not something most doctors test. And when it is low, when it falls below the threshold your cells need, the deficiencies we have covered in this series do not simply coexist. They amplify each other. Next week, I name it. I show you where it sits in every pathway we have discussed, and I tell you what becomes possible when you address it for people who have tried everything in this series and still feel only partial improvement. Subscribe so you see it the moment it goes up. Because if this series has felt like a building case, it has been. And next week is the verdict. I will see you then. Take care of those legs.